Welcome to this week's History in the Kitchen. I am Charlotte Amendola. I am your host of History in the Kitchen every week. You can find my blog at www.teachinghistoryherway.com. You can like this page so that you can see when I'm live once a week on Fridays doing History in the Kitchen. You can also grab some of the lesson plans or things that I put up on my blog from here. If you want to view a History in the Kitchen previously, you can view it from my Facebook page, or you can view it by subscribing to my YouTube channel, Teaching History Her Way. And you can follow me on Instagram, Teaching History Her Way, or you can follow me on Twitter, History Her Way, because Twitter doesn't give me enough characters to make my username the whole thing. This week, we are going to be talking about Black Wall Street, and we'll be making Apple Dowdy. Black Wall Street is an African-American section of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So first, as an educator, I never assume that people know their geography. You might, that's awesome. You might not. If you don't, this is a good time for you. So here's a map of the United States. It's backwards. Sorry, I'm still working on the tech stuff and figuring out how to make things mirror. And your red state just above Texas is Oklahoma. And that little dot right there, that is Tulsa. Okay? So that's the part of the United States that we're talking about today. And inside Tulsa, there is an African-American section, and it is called the Greenwood section. The reason it's called Black Wall Street is because Booker T. Washington dubbed it that way. That's its nickname, but it's called the Greenwood section. And this is what the Greenwood section looks like. This is the National Park Service's map. And the yellow is where you're going to find Black Wall Street. This is the Greenwood section right here. Okay. So that's where we are in the United States. As we are talking, you are going to want to preheat your oven to 375 degrees. So why don't you go ahead and do that so that you are ready to bake when we're ready to cook. All right, so in Black Wall Street, you had 191 businesses at its peak. So in 1921, there were 191 businesses in Black Wall Street, and those businesses were Black owned and they were Black shopped. There were 15 doctors, there was one chiropractor, 2 dentists, 3 lawyers, a library, a hospital, schools, churches, and 1,149 family residences. So it was bustling. It was a hustle and bustle kind of place for people to go, Black people to go, in order to shop Black businesses and live in a Black neighborhood. And the reason why so many Black Americans flocked to this section of Tulsa, Oklahoma, is because they were fleeing Jim Crow laws in the South. Now, in case you don't know what Jim Crow laws are, they are state and local laws that enforced segregation and they were enacted in the late 1800s, and the early 1900s. So Jim Crow laws are going to segregate society. Basically, they're going to say Black people get one thing and white people get another. And the whole point of those Jim Crow laws was to keep Black people from voting and becoming prosperous. It segregated school. So Jim Crow laws segregated schools. They segregated transportation. So you may have heard that Black people had to ride in the back of the bus, or there were separate train cars for Black Americans. That's what Jim Crow laws did. They also segregated public places. They segregated restaurants. They segregated bathrooms. These Jim Crow laws segregated things right down to drinking fountains, to water fountains. So having a population that's so restricted, they didn't want to stay there. And I don't blame them, would you? So what happened is in 1899, Greenwood is going to become a place for African Americans. All right, so let's cook a little and then we'll get back to our history. So what you're going to want to do while we're talking at this point is, if you haven't chopped your apples yet, you're going to want to chop your apples for Apple Dowdy. And I'll show you the newspaper article that I clipped so that you can see where I got this recipe from. My chopped apples are nice and small, as you can see. I've also seen recipes where you can slice them thin like apple pie. In essence, this is an apple pie, just so you know. So go ahead and chop up your apples if you haven't already. And you can also, while we're talking, cut your bread. I found out last night during my test kitchen, you don't need the whole loaf, so you don't have to slice the whole loaf. I would slice maybe four pieces into 1 inch or 1/2 inch strips. Okay. All right. So in Tulsa even, there were segregation laws. And the segregation laws in Tulsa prevented black people and white people from living in the same neighborhoods. So if a white neighborhood was 75% white, black people were not allowed to move in. And if a black neighborhood was 75% white, white people were not able to move in. So it segregated buyer property, and there were railroad tracks that divided the white part of Tulsa from the black part of Tulsa. And that's where you get your Greenwood section. Segregation was so bad that the main street in the Greenwood section of Tulsa, called Greenwood Avenue, ended where the black section ended. So there wasn't even a Greenwood Avenue in the white section of Tulsa. It turned into a totally different street, even though that street crossed the railroad tracks. So the founder of Black Wall Street, or the first entrepreneur that's going to start making Black Wall Street what it is a man named O.W. Gurley. And O.W. Gurley moves from Arkansas. He was the son of former enslaved people. He was mostly self-educated, and he felt that the only way that he and other black people in the South were going to be able to prosper was to move out. So he bought 80 miles of West Tulsa. He claimed a plot of land. He became the principal of a local school. He ran a successful general store. So there was a lot of stuff that was going on in O.W. Gurley's life. And eventually, O.W. Gurley is going to loan money to other black entrepreneurs in order to build up the town. And he also opens a boarding house. I have a picture to show you of the boarding house. For people who are leaving the South, this is Gurley's boarding house. For people who are leaving the South and are just getting started trying to figure out their lives up in Tulsa. So he really has faith, and he really wants people to succeed. Eventually, another person is going to move in, his business partner. His name is J.B. Stratford. He is another son of formerly enslaved people. He graduated Oberlin College, and he went to Indiana Law School. So he was really, really well educated, and he's going to start buying up properties and running a string of businesses. So eventually he opens this beautiful hotel. It's a 54-room hotel, and it has all of the amenities that hotels on the other side of Tulsa have that black people don't have access to because of segregation. So black people can't go to that other hotel. They open their own. It has a casino inside. It has a dining hall. It features regular jazz performances. It has a saloon, so it has a bar. And the estimated value in today's money of that hotel was $1 million. So this is getting to be a really big hustle and bustle of a place. And basically what Gurley and Stratford feel is that by keeping money in the community and by black people supporting one another's businesses, they are going to be able to be successful despite Jim Crow laws. There was another group of couple of black business owners in the area, and their names were John and Lola Williams. They owned a candy shop, and they built the Dreamland Theater. So we have a picture of the Dreamland Theater right here. So black people weren't allowed to go to white movie theaters, but there was one that they built on their own in Greenwood. It had 750 seats. In addition, there were also 2 newspapers, one of which was the Tulsa Star. The Tulsa Star is where I get today's recipe from. So there was I originally, as a historian, I just start digging through primary sources to try and find what I need, and I needed a recipe. And I thought maybe I would find a restaurant and a restaurant menu. So I started going through the Tulsa Star and trying to find different restaurant advertisements to then try and locate a menu. But then as I was perusing the Tulsa Star, I found a bi-weekly article or bi-weekly section called The Kitchen Cabinet by Nellie Maxwell. And Nellie had a great recipe for Apple Dowdy, and that's what we're making today. So this is the page from the Tulsa Star from 1915 where I got today's recipe. So let's cook a little bit, and then we'll talk a little bit more about Black Wall Street. All right, so you're going to take your apples and put them in your pan. It needs to be, the recipe recommends an 8x8 baking dish. I have a round one, so we're going to use a round one. You could also put this in a pie plate. So any kind of baking dish will do as long as your apples pretty much reach the top. I'm also trusting that you washed your hands. I already did because I've been at this for a while today. All right, so we put our apples in and then we need to mix the sugar and cinnamon that we're going to put in. So you need a half a cup of brown sugar. Make sure you pack it pretty tightly. It doesn't matter if it's light brown sugar or dark brown sugar, as long as it's brown sugar. I'm doing this a little messy, and that's okay. All right, I need a little bit more. Don't put too much sugar in, otherwise it's gonna get gooey and a little gross. I don't know how many of you have ever made a mistake with your apple pie before. I have several times, so here's half a cup of brown sugar. And then you are going to use, I used half a tablespoon. I like my apples cinnamony. If you don't follow the original recipe, which was a half teaspoon or a teaspoon, I can't remember which, I like to put some extra in, so I'm putting in half a tablespoon because I like a lot of cinnamon in my apple pie. All right. And we're gonna give it a stir with, of course, a wooden spoon. And please don't forget, today is also giveaway day. If you share this live stream or you share the video afterwards, it earns you an entry for some Williams-Sonoma towels and a Williams-Sonoma wooden spoon. Those are two of my favorite things to cook with. And I figure if you're gonna join me every week, might as well gear you up with some kitchen stuff. All right. So once you have that all mixed together, your next job is to take the sugar mixture and you're going to sprinkle it on top, right on top of the apples. The really, really fun part is coming up. Okay. All right. So if you look for Black Wall Street or the Greenwood District in Tulsa in your history book, or if you take history classes now, if you're not in grad school, and maybe even if you are in grad school, you're not going to find that history. And that's part of why I do history in the kitchen. I want you to learn as much history as you can, even the stuff that's not necessarily in the book. All right, so you have this beautiful looking sugar topping on your apples. Next step is to pour a half a cup of water on top of this mixture. Spread it out, don't just glob it in one place. And the next part is the really, really fun part, or at least the boys and I thought that this was the really fun part during our test kitchen. Next step is you're going to melt your butter, and then we're going to dip the cut bread in the butter. That's what makes it taste super good. Okay, so as we're waiting for the butter to melt, why don't we talk a little bit more about some of those founders of Black Wall Street? We already talked about two. Another founding father of Black Wall Street was a guy named James Henry Goodwin. Goodwin moved to Tulsa. He was encouraged by O.W. Gurley, the guy who owned the boarding house and who basically funded a lot of the businesses on Black Wall Street in the beginning. He started out as a store clerk, so he owned a store, but eventually he became the youngest entrepreneur in Greenwood. He had his hands in a lot of the different businesses, and he became the owner of two of the longest lasting businesses in Greenwood, actually in all of North Tulsa, and it was the Jackson Undertaking Company and the Oklahoma Eagle. Now, Undertaker does not mean wrestler, and Undertaker in this sense does not mean burial of dead people. An undertaker is a contractor, so he becomes a contractor, which is actually pretty cool. Another person who was responsible for a lot of the building up of Greenwood was actually a pilot, and his name was Simon Berry. I'll show you a picture of him in a moment. Got my butter. It's gonna get hard to show you pictures while I've got my hands dipped in butter, but that's okay. So, this is Simon Berry, and he is pictured with his airplane. Cool, huh? He, believe it or not, starts the city's transportation system. Pilot transportation seems to work, right? So he added a bus system to Greenwood, and he chartered airplanes, and he eventually becomes the largest employer of Black people in Oklahoma and the United States. So Simon Berry was responsible for getting people around the city, which is really, really important. I don't know if you have ever studied civilizations or studied the way cities grow, but the only way for a city to grow is for transportation to happen, to get people to come in and out and to get people from one side of the city to another. So right now, the Greenwood Cultural Center, which is in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we're gonna dip it in butter, and we're gonna start covering our apples. They are trying to rebuild historic Greenwood. If you go to Tulsa, and I learned this from another teacher that I met on Facebook that I told about this program today, she said that if you go to Greenwood, you wouldn't even know that Black Wall Street existed. There are very few historical landmarks. So the Greenwood Cultural Society, who also helped me with today's programming, they were very kind and they were emailing me back and forth. They are raising money in order to restore some of the historical landmarks and to fund their museum. So if you are feeling so inclined to go to their website and send them a donation, I think that would be really, really great. Okay, so we have to remember why Black Wall Street existed. And Black Wall Street existed because of Jim Crow laws and because people were unwelcome in other parts of Tulsa and the South because of the color of their skin. So the other side of Tulsa, across the tracks, was still not welcoming of their Black neighbors. So please don't forget that part. So we have all of this success, which is absolutely wonderful. But the reason for this success was because of amazing Black entrepreneurs who were only allowed to express themselves and show what they knew and show what they could do in a place outside of white control. So let's not forget that part. Now, eventually in 1921, there is going to be a Tulsa Greenwood Massacre. If you look it up, a lot of places call it a riot. And in many of my lessons to you, I have talked to you about how important language is. Riot indicates that the people that were there, that lived there, destroyed their own stuff. And that is not what happened. In 1921, a Black man was accused of getting a little too close to a white woman, and the people on the white side of Tulsa, who were not nearly as prosperous as the people in the Greenwood section, came over and attacked the residents of Greenwood and basically destroyed Greenwood Avenue and destroyed the beautiful homes. They looted the beautiful homes, and there were even attacks from the air. I was reading about that. And the Red Cross had to come in and help people because lots and lots of people were getting hurt at the hands of others who were hateful and jealous. So if you went to go look for these landmarks, very few survived. Simon Berry, his business actually survived the massacre, which is pretty awesome, and he continued to be a businessman, but many, many, many of the businesses of Greenwood were lost because of the massacre. So I'm going to put a little bit more butter on top of this bread because I was a little conservative in the amount of butter that we're going to use. So I'm going to show you one more picture or a couple more pictures while this is in the oven. It goes in the oven for an hour. I'm not going to keep you for an hour, don't worry. So let's go put this in the oven and then we'll talk some more. I also had to get the butter off of my hands. All right. So your kitchen is about to start smelling really, really good, just so you know. I'm giving you that warning. All right, so on June 21st, 1921, an armed white mob descended upon the Greenwood district. They attacked their businesses, they attacked their homes. 300 people were killed, and hundreds more were innocent, and businesses were lost. So all of those beautiful businesses, the beautiful hotel, were gone. So if you could take a look at this picture, this is a parade on Greenwood Avenue and a picture of the businesses. Oven should be at 375. Okay. And this is what it looked like after the massacre. So the reason I talked to you about Black Wall Street and the founders of Black Wall Street and the entrepreneurs first is because the history of Black Wall Street isn't just the massacre. So if you look it up, you're going to find a ton of stuff on the massacre. But the first thing that we needed to do was acknowledge the entrepreneurship and the genius of the people who moved into the Greenwood section in order to find some freedom and in order to find some success. After Greenwood was razed, basically, and the neighborhood was burned and people fired on residents who tried to help themselves, it was really hard for that section of Tulsa to build itself up. So even today, there are struggles in that section of Tulsa where it's trying to get back on its feet. So donations to that Greenwood Historical Society also will help to rebuild historic Greenwood back to its original splendor. So magically, my Apple Dowdy is done. It also changed shape. I'm just kidding, I cooked it last night. So this is what your Apple Dowdy should look like when it's done. It should have some nice toasted bread at the top, nice and brown, but not burnt. So keep an eye on it in the oven over the next hour or so to make sure that you're not burning your bread. It should start to smell like apple pie, and it should taste even more delicious for your dessert or for your midday treat, or maybe this is your lunch. I'm not judging. So thank you so much for talking to me about Black Wall Street today. I hope you learned something new. I hope you learned something that was not in your history book. If you knew anything about Black Wall Street, I hope that you learned a little bit more today. What I really hope that you know is that history is made by people of every shade. So let's make sure that we don't neglect anybody's history when we're studying. Next week, I am trying to decide if I'm going to talk about women's suffrage or Sacco and Vanzetti. So you will be surprised tomorrow when you find out through my announcements what the next one is going to be. Please make sure that you also maybe give this a like or give this a share so that we can share as many people's history with as many people as possible. Thank you so much for coming. Enjoy your Apple Dowdy, and I will see you next week. Have a great week. Bye-bye.